For today's program, Ed Golly.
I think maybe he just didn't spell it right. He thinks the Peace Prize is spelled Piece and refers to a particular element of the female anatomy with all the affairs he's had and all the fun he had with Epstein. He thinks he should get some kind of a prize for that. How the hell do you get a Nobel Peace Prize by starting a war? Can anybody explain that to me? Trump is a titanic, vainglorious screw-up. His moment for declaring victory and end the war in Iran is past. Escalation will be an even bigger catastrophe, and he has no good options left. But the best option for him, for the country, for the world is to somehow get him to end the war as soon as possible. Isn't it remarkable that he says we have a schedule, but we don't know when we're going to get there? We're ahead of schedule, but we don't know when we're going to get there. We're learning why no American president ever attempted to attack Iran before, because whatever gains we might achieve on the battlefield, the costs of war to America and the world would not be worth it. A very conservative estimate of the direct costs of the war now stands at $6 to $10 trillion. That's with a T, or between 5 and 9% of global gross domestic product. It's already rivaling the cost of the entire global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. Joining me in the Tan Talk studio today, attorney and former circuit judge Kevin Carey, along with our voice of reason, senior political analyst Gary Givens. Gary?
Yeah, the problem is that these energy, food, and commodity shocks are just not about money. They mean slower growth, rising unemployment, bankrupt companies, social strife, literally everywhere in the world. And farmers all around the world are freaking out because they're struggling to get fertilizer through the Straits of Hormuz, where most of the fertilizer is manufactured over there. And Trump may have triggered the largest global food crisis in history by this.
And now, even though he's never asked for congressional approval, he wants $200 billion for this enterprise that he's engaging us in. Well, if it's costing $1 billion a day, and we've been in it 3 weeks, that means we've spent about, $20 billion. So what do we need the other $180 billion for? What does that tell us, Kevin?
Well, it tells us a lot about this administration. They have no idea what they're doing. But people are dying. I was watching a congressional hearing in the Congress, or the senator from Ossoff from Georgia. You may have seen it. He had all the military people before him, and he showed the picture. It was a photo op that Trump was making, and it was a fundraiser. And Gary, you had mentioned, we talked about this earlier about gaining information as Trump does. You can buy your way into classified information with this guy. But he was celebrating and the picture Trump was using was the flag draped coffin of one of the dead soldiers who should not have died because of this horrible unprovoked war. He does not have the ability to have any empathy in any way. Again, you can Google very quickly. He was on the plane and he was being asked about these the initial six soldiers, 3 of whom were from MacDill Air Force Base, the 6th Air Fueling Wing out of MacDill Air Force Base here in Tampa. And he doesn't even have the ability to fake any type of empathy. If you watch it, and it's priceless, they asked him about it, he blows the question off and goes, next question. In a heartbeat, as if it was some non-question, it would give him an opportunity to have some humanity. This man is I won't say socialist, but he's a sociopath was the word I was trying to say. No, a narcissistic sociopath. He doesn't have the ability to even feel empathy. But how is this going to get any better? We talked about $1 billion a day, and his buddies and we talked about a minute, the winners of this. His buddies are being helped by this in many ways, including the defense funds that are being wasted on this. But how is this going to get better? How does any Mideast situation like this get better, which is what Trump said himself when he ran for election a few years ago. So I'll stop there.
Well, I'll put it to you this way. There are winners and losers so far, right, Gary?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to grasp what $1 billion a day is, but when they started breaking it down, it's like $11,000 a second.
Ah,
Okay.
you sure about that?
Yeah. So,
And quickly, just Gary, when you tie it back also to the conversation you've had about these cuts of Medicaid and hospitals and food stamps, these are real people being hurt by this. There was a famous, you may remember back in the '60s with Nelson Rockefeller. One of the concerns they had about him when he was in politics was he was too wealthy, and you may recall the famous comment he made. He said, "Well, $1 million here, $1 million there. At some point, you start talking about real money, and now you can make that billion here, billion there." But this is at the cost to people being hurt in this country, in addition to the people being killed. It's immoral. Let me be very clear. It's immoral what's happening there.
yeah. Well, there was a cartoon in the Tampa Bay Times this week on Mondays. They put 10 cartoons from cartoonists, political cartoonists around the country. And one of them was that the winners of this war, and it showed Putin and Bibi Netanyahu holding hands above their head. And they're the only ones that have benefited from this. Netanyahu to stay out of jail, and Putin is making money now. Tell me why we lifted the sanctions on Russia after they're using it to fight the Ukraine war, and the intelligence has been leaked that they have been helping the Iranians in this war, and now we're sitting there saying, oh, that's fine, you don't need sanctions, and we're allowing other people to get Russian oil, other allies in Europe to get Russian oil, when before they had all agreed not to do that. So Russia's a huge winner in this thing, and much more so than anybody else.
And why is no Republicans just bothered to hell by the fact that they are helping Iran, as you just said, Gary, with intelligence, which is to the detriment of lives, American lives, and not one person has come up and said that's a problem, let alone, as you said it, about the sanctions being lifted for no damn reason either. But to share intelligence, why is nobody saying anything?
Well, I think that did come up at the Senate hearings. Somebody grilled.
I'm talking about Republicans saying it, though.
Oh, yeah.
People that are on the other side of the aisle saying
Here's
it.
some of the other winners. Saudi Arabia, they long hated Iran. The United Arab Emirates has similarly pushed America to attack Iran since at least 2010. The American defense weapons industry is now making billions of dollars. That's no
what
problem,
that $200 billion is for.
War
in case you wonder.
The biggest economic boost you can have.
Yeah,
right?
because Hexeth said it this morning. He said not only we need to restock, we need to make sure that we have plenty, I guess, for the next campaign, right? Cuba or wherever we're headed next.
Yeah. Don Jr. and Eric have taken a big position in a drone manufacturing business, getting them in on the Pentagon gravy train. And of course, Crooked Donald himself, who has succeeded in largely pushing Epstein off the front page, although that may come to a head when Bondi is put on the hot seat.
I'm going to get in line. I'm getting in line for that show. I'm getting my popcorn early.
Yeah. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu, who would be in prison if he couldn't keep wars going, because that's what keeps him in power. And the biggest winner may be Jared Kushner, who apparently pushed Trump to initiate the war while he's trying to solicit $5 billion from the same Arab states that have been begging American administrations for decades to attack Iran.
Hey, can I discuss Jared Kushner just for 1 second?
Sure.
Do you think the average Republican understands that he could not even gain a security clearance at the time?
Yeah.
He could not gain a security clearance.
The only reason he got one is because his father-in-law said, you now have a security clearance.
And even now, he won't disclose his financial information that he should be. If he's going to be negotiating on behalf of this country, he needs to come clean, but he won't. And the boss says, I don't care about the law. Crooked Donald doesn't care about the law. He's just let him do what he wants.
Well, and how often do we still hear people whining about, Biden's son? Do people understand the amount of money that Jared Kushner already gained on top of what's happening now? And we talked about the numbers a minute ago. And also that isn't it true that that Trump pardoned his father? Who was wasn't he a felon? I think.
Yeah.
I think he was
Yeah.
Kushner's father was a convicted felon.
Yeah, and now he's an
And-
ambassador. I can't remember which country they put him as an ambassador.
But you
to,
know who
you know.
prosecuted him was the former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie. He was a prosecutor, and he's the one that put Kushner's father in prison for blackmail. Well, minor. We don't need to worry about that kind of crime. And that's why he was widely ignored in the
Excuse
Trump
me.
first administration, because Kushner was mixed up in it. Well, now the New York Times is reporting that he's back at the Arab Trough trying to get that $5 billion into his company that he uses to act as an investment manager. I hear some people then on the left in the media, they say, well, they gave him $2 billion and now he's trying to get them to give him another $5 billion. He's not getting that money, but he's getting exorbitant fees to manage it. And even though he doesn't know anything about it, it would not be difficult in a city like New York to find a couple of competent, experienced investment managers who would know how to manage that money and make it grow for the Saudis. And what's he getting out of that? A 1.25% fee. That sounds like a de minimis amount, but it adds up to 25 million balloons a year. So he's already made over $100 million since it's all started right at the end of Crooked Donald's first term. Now, if he adds another 5 on top of that, and he's managing 7, by the time he pays those de minimis expenses relative, even if he pays these guys $300,000 or $400,000 a year and gets a staff of 2 or 3 people to do that for him and rents an office, he's still going to be netting over $50 million a year to do nothing.
Ed,
Do you think there could be a motive there behind this war that really doesn't have anything to do with protecting American security, but making him wealthy at the expense of the people who die and all the oil that gets wasted and burned?
We learned in Watergate, you follow the money, and there's no question
Yep.
that anything to do with this administration or family is tied to the money. And there's two levels of corruption when you talk about the amount of money you're talking about, which is mind-boggling. It's just corrupt. But beyond the amount of it, and for nothing, for very little service, like you said, it's a percentage of a huge amount of money for what he's not even competent in that area. But secondarily, it drives the decisions. It drives the policy. People don't talk enough about that point. This, and it would tie into what you're suggesting, but it's all about how we can get enrich ourselves and our party, and that drives policy. And I don't know why there's not any Republican who may be bothered by that or should be bothered by that.
I think because if they speak out, then they assume the wrath of Trump, and they know that he'll primary him out. Remember, he had the control. He had the ability to control who would win the primaries when he wasn't even in office. He has that tight a grip on the Republican Party, and they're all whores. All they care about is staying in power. They'll sacrifice country, military personnel, the Constitution, anything to stay in power. They have no integrity at all. They don't even know what it means. If we spend 10 minutes trying to explain it to them, to go right over their heads. They don't know. They don't care. It's unbelievable.
Well, when you talk about Kushner and the money that was given to him by Saudi Arabia, then you follow along and see what Saudi Arabia got from the U.S. government as a result of that. And the U.S. Department of Commerce has authorized the sale of up to 70,000 advanced AI chips, equivalent to NVIDIA's Blackwell GB300 processors, to Saudi Arabia and UAE. These are valued at over $1 billion combined, and it supports the creation of these huge data centers that they're trying to build over in the Mideast. There's always a vig, for what happens in this administration. So if you give my son-in-law $2 billion, then we'll figure out a way to get you something, and don't forget that the government took a stake in these companies too. So,
well, yeah, you talk about
unbelievably corrupt.
You talk about Saudi Arabia. All you need to know, and it's been a long history of problem with this administration, when they allowed the assassination and beheading of Khashoggi,
right?
Who worked for the Washington Post and did nothing. not even Trump didn't even have the decency to come out and say it was wrong. He didn't even say that because he is a pawn of money, which includes Saudi Arabia. So there should be little expectation that that's going to change. Now, also, FCC Chairman Brandon Kane doing his Vladimir Putin imitation is threatening news organizations for the merely reporting of the war. And you've got the defense secretary, and we've talked about, Whiskey Pete, as you like to say, for him sitting up there acting like he's some kind of choir boy trying to lecture us on defense policy, and he gets up there and questions the patriotism of this country if every news organization doesn't just kiss his ass and follow the line. I don't know where these people, who they come off thinking this is how we run this thing.
They've already taken the real news sources out of the room, the press room at the Pentagon, and they filled them with Breitbart and all these other right wing people that are just nodding and saying and podcasters. It's just unreal. He's more concerned about the way things are being reported, and we're more concerned about what are the facts, what's really happening. That's why Tulsi Gabbard was brought into that Senate hearing yesterday. And what did she omit from her written remarks that she filed in advance? She said, as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, which was what they did back in June, when they struck, remember the overnight strike that was totally obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. She says, as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. There has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capacity. And the senator from Virginia,
Mark Warner.
Yeah, Mark Warner said, I noticed that you skipped over that when you were giving your oral presentation. She said, well, in the interest of time, I wanted to cut it short. That's two sentences.
Let's listen to the exchange, beginning with that rather telling omission from her opening statement.
Even in your printed testimony today on page 6, and your last paragraph on page 6, as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. There's been no efforts to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. You omitted that paragraph from your oral opening. Was that because the president had said there was an imminent threat 2 weeks?
No, sir. I recognize that the time was running long, and I skipped through some of the
So
portions.
you chose to take
of my
omit-
oral delivered remarks.
You chose
sir.
to omit the parts that contradict the president. The president continues to say as well that he had no idea, was shocked that the Iranians had moved to take over the Strait of Hormuz. Did you provide any intelligence that would say that it would be that it was not likely that the Iranians would try to move on the strait?
I'm not aware of those remarks, and I think those of us here at the table can point to the fact that historically the Iranians have always threatened to leverage their control over
Why would the president say he was amazed?
I'm not aware of those remarks.
What about the comments the president made that thought that he was surprised again, reports that Iran struck the adjacent Gulf states?
Again, I'm not aware of those remarks. We have been
let me
and
ask you this.
continue to
Did
provide
you brief the president? Did you brief the president?
decisions.
Did you brief the president if he starts a war of choice, that the likely result would be that Iran would strike adjacent Gulf nations and close the Strait of Hormuz? Did you brief him on those two facts that I think have been consistently the assumptions of the intelligence community?
I have not and won't divulge internal conversations. I will say that those of us within the intelligence community continue to provide the president with all of the best objective intelligence available to inform his decisions.
And Tulsi Gabbard is pathetic. She's now a long line of men and women who have sold their soul for this clown. She came out of Hawaii as a relatively conservative Democratic congressperson. She ran for president, and I thought she was rather refreshing when she ran. She came forward with some thoughts that weren't the typical Democratic line. she then slowly becomes this Fox person and gets in line with Trump, and and it's just pathetic. And by the way, her position she's taking now is 180 degrees from what she said a year ago. She's a complete hypocrite. She has no credibility, and she's got one foot out the door anyway. People like her and Bonnie don't understand. Trump is purely transactional. He doesn't give a damn how much you kiss his ass if you're not helping him. She's going to be out the door, just like Bonnie's going to be out the door. It's embarrassing. She goes down to Georgia, completely out of her function as her role with intelligence, trying to kiss his ass about this 2020 election and find out what happened, when that issue's been resolved 6 years ago. And so now she's tap dancing. Now there's no question what you said, Gary, is correct. Oh, I just happened to omit. It's like, you remember Nixon happened to, he had his secretary, it inadvertently omitted
She erased this, 16 minutes or whatever.
Accidents happen.
Right. And so what it does, it's going to become a punchline, and it makes you a national joke. So is it worth it to you, Tulsi, to leave as your legacy a hypocritical joke? That's what you've done.
When she ran for president in 2019, remember she
Yes.
was one of the Democratic candidates
Absolutely.
standing up on the debate stage. Her commercials were her in uniform going to visit the graves of fallen soldiers, talking about how the worst thing we could ever do is get into forever war. And then she, as a fundraising tactic, sold T-shirts that said "No war in Iran" as a fundraiser for her campaign. That's been her MO and her mindset and her belief system forever. And here she and J.D. Vance are now having to do tap dances whenever this issue comes up, because both of them are against this war. But here they are. And yesterday she said, only the president can determine whether there is an imminent threat to American security. And everybody, all the senators said, no, that's your job. You're supposed to tell him. But you know what? I don't think he even gets a daily briefing. They've said for years that he just, blows those off. He doesn't read, and he doesn't, unless he's probably asleep most of the time these days, sadly. But, he doesn't get the daily briefing that all of these presidents have gotten. So it's no wonder that he makes these knee-jerk reactions.
Well, they used to joke about George W. Bush would get a very short summary
he had somebody
of information.
come in and read the briefings to him because he doesn't have the attention span
Bush?
to read. Yeah,
Well,
come in and tell him what they said.
But compared to Bush,
Imagine
with Trump, it's like Bush was reading War and Peace. I mean, Trump's got no attention span. And again, as I've mentioned before, they give him false information. He's like a child who you have to continue to convey to him that there is a Santa Claus. He's got to live in this non-reality. So he gets polls saying, it's wonderful, Trump, 85% of people support the war. When he says those statements, he believes them because he's been fed them by these enablers around him. But let me ask our listeners one question. Just what has occurred in the last 60 or 90 days that any Republican running for office could say, this is a good thing for my election or re-election? Just give me one thing that's occurred that would help that Republican get elected in November.
Yeah, and aren't the independent poll numbers down to about 29% approval of this war? And they're the deciding force in these elections, along with Democrats who have been turning out in droves in these special elections that we've seen ever since Trump took office. Just record percentages of Democrats turning out at the polls to vote, even though the party has only a 30% approval rating. What does that tell us?
I'll tell you one thing it says, and I will say this. People go to the polls primarily out of anger and resentment. All you're doing by starting this war that's killing people is creating more people angry. All you're doing is moving to the polls more people that are going to be voting against you. None of it makes any sense politically. So as a Democrat, I'm happy to see it politically, but in the meantime, people are dying. And again, you're not even seeing from these people the necessary concern and a sense of loss. What you see is the use of it as a political gain. The Iowa I talked about last week, the picture of the photo shoot in Iowa with Joni Ernst and the Iowa Grassley, and now we've got the one with Trump. Not only are they not feeling badly about it. They're using those deaths for political and monetary gain. I mean, what about that would be at all attractive to anyone in this country, let alone, the party affiliation?
Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with me, Ed Golly, and my co-hosts, Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey. We're going to take a short break here to tell you about some of the other fun programs here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the Jerome Powell case that got tossed by a judge named Boasberg, who is now on Trump's enemies list, and what could potentially happen in Cuba. We need to kind of think that through a little bit before we start carpet bombing Havana. What do you think? That and more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Tune in to the Shrink and Wrap Show here on Tan Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on Tan Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
The Shrink and Wrap Show at its new time, Thursdays from 4 to 5 p.m. here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
We inhabit a world order in which nuclear states can do whatever they want to non-nuclear states. International law is basically gone now that America, long leader of the international order, has abandoned the rule of law in favor of the law of the jungle. The only rational response for the rest of the world is to acquire nuclear weapons as quickly as possible. The next 20 years will likely see a great deal of nuclear proliferation as everyone from Canada to Germany to Poland to Japan to South Korea to Australia goes nuclear. Possession of nuclear weapons is now your only shield against aggression from Russia, China, and or the United States. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Strait of Hormuz because it's affecting everybody and everything. When you look at what the price of diesel is now, when you ride past the gas station, it's over $5 a gallon, and that's going to affect shipping of everything that we ship around this country, and food prices are going to go through the roof. Well, the problem with the Strait of Hormuz is that the Iranians have fast boats in there that they shoot rocket launchers from at ships to blow them up or catch them on fire. And they're sitting on these huge, amounts of oil in these ships that are just bombs ready to go off.
Slowest moving vessels on Earth.
Yeah, they're
and huge.
And there's something like 6,000 mines that they have deployed in the strait, and we only have 4 minesweepers. Again, I've said we're fighting the last war. We have these long-range ballistic missiles, and all these other countries are developing drones and drone defense systems faster than we are, and that's what they're using to fight. So they're using these fast boats to lay these mines, and then some of them are attached to the bottom of the ocean that can be released, but remote control to come up underneath these boats when they're. So Iran holds a lot of cards for how this plays out in the Straits of Hormuz, and it's really shocking to see the president, pissing everybody off, all of our allies. NATO has 100 minesweepers. Have they offered them to us? No, because he's already yelled at them, well, this is going to be very tough for NATO. Well, you didn't do anything to try to bring any of these countries on board. You didn't share the details with America, nor did you share it with any of our allies.
Or
as to
even
what was going on.
Congress.
Yeah.
Not even our own country.
But Gary, you know why? That's hard work.
Yeah.
You've actually got to do something. Trump doesn't do anything that's hard. He just talks, and it's easy to drop bombs. I mean, Hegseth the other day was very defensive about, didn't you understand these things were going to happen? Didn't you think this was going to, they've threatened, Iran's threatened to do this in that strait for years. You didn't think this was going to happen, create as you just mentioned, a food crisis, an energy crisis. I can tell you regular gas in Tampa is $4 a gallon right now. So I'm glad Trump wasn't his main promise to bring prices down?
$1.99 a gallon is what he promised.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's clear to me, again, having come from a military background and lived around this environment for the Vietnam War and many other wars, I've had the benefit of talking, to these generals as I grew up. It was a wonderful gift that I was granted. This group does not analyze the situation and how do they think this is going to play out? Why did they not understand this was going to be how it's going to play out? And you mentioned that about the distraction issue from Epstein, and I'm sure we'll talk about Epstein later in the show, but it's never going to go away. And in the meantime, you're spending $1 billion a day. Your people are dying. How is that something, if you're sitting in a room talking about this possibility, to say, yes, let's do this?
There's another possibility. I wonder if it's been considered, and it goes back to something I saw an article on 60 Minutes, probably back in the 90s. Morley Safer was the reporter, and he explained how a nuclear bomb could be loaded onto a container and put on a ship in Yemen that's heading for New York Harbor, right? Well, what's to prevent Iran from buying a bomb from North Korea? They have them.
Or
right?
Pakistan, sure.
Exactly.
Trade a bunch of oil for a nuke, sure.
Yeah, and he actually showed the ship coming into New York Harbor, and he said, you see the orange crate on the back, third one from the top? That's the one that has this imaginary bomb in it, a nuclear bomb going right into New York Harbor, where somebody could stand on the boardwalk on the Brooklyn side with a remote control device to detonate a timer on it so that it would go off 4 hours later, giving him time to take the next cab out to Kennedy Airport and fly back to London or wherever he wants to go before this thing even goes off. It would make 9/11 look like an attic house fire, right?
Well, and there has been very little talk about that.
And gee, are we giving them an incentive to kind of think this through and think, gee, we could do something like that? We don't need to build our own bomb. They're on the market.
Well, there's no question, too, that this has increased the likelihood of there being another significant tragedy in this country, as you mentioned, 9/11. And they've raised that with Trump a few times. And again, he blows it off. He does not have the ability to respond to that.
And here we are firing all the most experienced guys in the intelligence agencies that would be able to track this down because they aren't Trump loyalists. Right.
They aren't.
What are our
deniers.
priorities really being established here?
Yeah.
Well, the only sanity is in these congressional hearings. And you mentioned Mark Warner.
Mm-hmm.
I think any side of the aisle would have to agree that Warner is a heavy hitter. He's been there for many years. He's from Virginia, and when he went after that panel yesterday, nothing he said was incorrect. They can ignore it like the cult they are, but Mark Warner is not someone just to wave the flag as a Democrat. He's a very centrist type person. He wouldn't keep getting reelected in the state of Virginia if he was some liberal. He's not. He's always been an impressive defense-minded senator. So these are real questions. So the only forum that we're hearing any sanity is in those congressional hearings like yesterday.
And was Ossoff an attorney before he was a senator?
Yeah,
So you can
attorney.
kind of tell by the way he questioned her. He clearly an experienced litigator, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, you don't hear much talk about him losing that seat this year. You used to talk, we're going to pick him off in Georgia. You don't hear that talk anymore. The governor's not running against him, I saw.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sam Stein from the Bulwark, Trump has been so erratic. One day he says, we don't need any help from anybody. We can do this by ourselves. And the next day he says, well, we could use some help from some of these other countries. Why aren't folks helping? And then the next day it's, well, help's on the way. We've talked to a lot of people. We can't tell you who they are. Right. And then they never materialize. And he says, well, the final thing he may say is, well, we'll just abandon it and leave it to everybody else to clean up the mess. Well, the problem is he's created the real bottleneck in the Gulf that is going to have, having worldwide implications. A fifth of the energy of the global energy comes through that 27-mile stretch of land, which Trump doesn't even know how to spell. And some of his rants, he's spelled straight, like a straight line with a GHT.
Well, I think one of the most interesting assessments I've heard is that these other foreign leaders don't answer to Trump. They answer to their constituents. They know that they're going to be just as unpopular if they send their troops into this quagmire as we are. They see the numbers over here. So their attitude is, you guys made this mess, you clean it up. You didn't ask us before you went in. They did go in when we went into Iraq. They helped us there, in Afghanistan. They took casualties. They spent money. Now they're saying, well, if you're going to just keep doing this over and over, don't look at us.
Plus, he's so erratic in the way he flips from one thing to the next, depending upon what day it is or whatever he's trying to do to sow chaos. Again, it may be for political reasons to avoid the Epstein disclosures, but how do our allies? They're not going to go to war with a crazy leader who changes his mind day to day, minute to minute.
No, let's focus a minute on what's happened with NATO and these allies. Trump came forward as a bully about, we're going to take over Greenland, we're going to take over Canada. Of course, none of those things are even talked about anymore. It's like a child who says, well, I want that. You go into Toys R Us, give me that. But what's happened to his detriment and our detriment as a country, these presidents and prime ministers, they're not afraid of us. They stood up strong on this Denmark issue. They're laughing at us right now, and they do not fear this man. He's a bully, and the only thing he has to work with is fear. They don't fear him. And you see what's happening. They're not stepping up to assist. And he's whining about that. And he was bad mouthing France the other day. They don't fear him. And that's all this man has. That's all a bully has. And when he loses fear and they're laughing at him, he's got nothing left. And that's what's happened. He doesn't have the ability to and as you said about what NATO has in terms of the mining issue. So where does he go from there? He decides to move on to Cuba. That's exactly right.
The military is doing an amazing job. They really are executing their individual missions very, very well. The problem is the political leadership and the civilians that are making the policy and sending them into these things haphazardly. That's the sad part. They're doing their duty and they're taking these orders and they're fulfilling them. The problem is the orders they're being given.
So do you think Trump has an incentive to keep this going if it is effectively keeping our attention diverted from the Epstein files?
Well, there's an incentive, but the problem is it's not good. It's not. This isn't going well for him. This is not.
Netanyahu does.
Well, yeah, but this is not a popular war. If you're saying, again, it maybe helps him. This November is going to be a bloodbath for Republicans. And
maybe even in the Senate.
That's
right?
There's what I wanted to mention there. There's listeners are probably aware that these betting. What's big? Everything's betting now. And there's now something called Kalshi, and that was why the Republicans were so confident Trump was going to win over Harris, because these betting lines, you put your money where your mouth is, were very much in favor of Trump. These betting lines, the House is gone already, and the Senate, which was never ever really in play. We're going to talk a minute about that, but it's in play now. Those betting lines now have a 51-49. In support of the Democrats taking back the House, which is not a small. They would need to pick up 4 seats because they're down 3, and then in a 50-50, the tie would be broken by Vance. But it's changed, and they have taken a situation where the Republicans would at least keep the Senate and would avoid any issues about, for example, impeachment. And that's now in play. You look just very quickly, I think North Carolina is going to go. Maine is with Collins may go. You've got a governor who's running for that seat. And in fact, she has an opponent on the Democratic side that really even scores better against Collins.
She's an independent, isn't she?
Yes. And Alaska, you've got someone running against the incumbent who has already won one statewide office in the House. In Alaska, a House seat is statewide. Texas may be in play. That's a mess with, I mean, every day I think Trump doesn't endorse Cornyn, he's going to lose, which creates a candidate who's much more likely to lose to the Democrat. Iowa may be in play. Ohio is now in play. And then on the Democrat side, I don't see really any seat that's in serious danger. I think Georgia with Ossoff is not in play. You've got a few open seats, but it's where maybe a month ago or so, you'd say there's no way that would happen. It's on the board. And when something's on the board in politics, when you have this wave, and there's going to be a wave, I would not want to be a Republican running for re-election in the Senate either right now.
Even in Florida?
Well, you know, it's funny you say that because I'm now hearing some discussions of that being, you know, you see the wave, that is now potentially in play. And I heard a commentator say just a couple of days ago that if that were to happen, you have a former circuit judge, former colleague of mine, who was the Attorney General, who was Ashley Moody, that was never elected to the U.S. Senate. But yes, when you get caught in those waves of politics, that's a possibility. And when you're even thinking about Florida, which has now become sadly a red state, that's a problem for the party. You know, another reason it's a problem, Ed, is because you've got to now start spending money in that state that you would not otherwise need to spend, and you want to be spending it in other states where it really matters.
You know, one issue that I think we really need to look back at pretty quickly is who bet on the oil futures before the first bombs were dropped.
That's a good point.
Because somebody's made a boatload of money doing that, and with this administration, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there were, you know, tips given to particular friends at Mar-a-Lago or whatever that, you know,
the whole cabinet
might be a good time to double down on oil. You know, we'll see what the statute of limitations is on some of those insider trading.
Gee, I recall that one of Trump's promises ignored was that 12 months after he was elected, and our energy prices would be cut in half. 18 months at the outset. We're on the doorstep of that, and now it's getting close to double with the utility prices going up so much, and their guaranteed profits that they can make, that they're passing along to us, that he has no way to control that. He thought over drilling would do it, but obviously that doesn't work, because even though we're a net oil exporter, our prices are still going up
because it's a global market. We've said this on this show forever, that the president can't control oil prices any more than I can. And the fact that we sell all this oil to people where the demand and the price is really high now, and they're not going to sell it to us for a low price. They're going to sell it for the world market price.
Well, on top of that, now you create a war in Iran, which is the last thing you should be doing. That has created the biggest crisis in terms of the oil that this country and this world has ever seen. So not only can you not control the market, you can blow it up, which is what he's done. This is the worst thing you can do. This market now is just in chaos. And all you're going to see from that, as you've seen immediately, is increase in prices.
So we're ahead of schedule, but we don't know what the schedule is. It's just whenever Crooked Donald decides to pull us out. Suppose that day comes and the Strait of Hormuz is open for transit. He's now telling us that the next invasion of U.S. forces, which will probably be, again, to distract us from the Epstein files, is Cuba. Sometimes Crooked Donald actually does what he says.
I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good honor. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're very weakened nation.
Well, after Venezuela won the world baseball contest, whatever
Classic,
the Trump said 51st state for Venezuela. So this is what his crazy mindset is. That it's all mine. I can do whatever the hell I want to do.
He's
And
no
it's
mystery. I mean, he said, I can do whatever I want to do. I can take that country. Who the hell do you think you are? You know you're a dictator. You think you're a dictator. You will find out when both houses are Democratic, and in about 8 months you're not a dictator.
But what would that look like? Would we send ground forces in and go right into Havana and tell the leadership, you're out, we're going to put a puppet in, and now we're going to start exploiting you economically, just like we did before Castro came in? Our companies are going to come in and run your casinos on the beach and all your sugarcane fields.
Are we going to send the mafia back in because
That's
they
what I
ran
wanna
it
know.
before?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Eddie
US
Garrett,
sugar.
You think, in here or in Florida, Cuba is 90 miles off, and Heath acts like it's the Bahamas or something. Don't you think if Cuba had been that easy to address, it would have been dealt with years ago? Think about Cuba almost took down John F. Kennedy between the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's a large country with very strong feelings, toward what they want. And the problem that we have is in South Florida, there's such a strong anti-Cuba base of these people that have come from Cuba that politically it's difficult for you to back off that point.
They're going to want to go back and resume the property that their families lost when Castro came in, which may not sit too well with whoever's sitting on that property now. Now, in all fairness, I suppose the U.S. could go in and say, all right, we're going to have a democratic election. We're going to set up a republic. We're going to write a constitution that's similar to ours. And then you guys are on your own. And they probably would assume that they could trust the Cuban people to want to live that way.
But think about the insanity. None of this is what MAGA wants. MAGA's not based upon nation building. In fact, it's just the opposite. Now, let's take over Venezuela. And by the way, what's happening in Venezuela? I don't think that's doing real well. You've got the second person in charge. You can't just take it over. I know for Trump, he just wanted the oil money. And Iran, that's going to be just a generational problem. And Cuba is not going to be easily taken care of. These are strong-minded people down there. And they primarily want a better way of life.
Well, the worst part is all we need to do is just lift the trade embargoes and let business be conducted as usual.
Yep.
Because
That's the tragedy of that. It's a shame that could have been the case years ago.
And Kennedy may have done that. I've read that he was thinking seriously about doing this. He was backing off from a hardline position on Cuba, deciding that, look, we're just going to go back to trade with them and let them decide what kind of government they want. But
I think you're right about that.
In every case when we've gone in, whether it was in Chile or the Central American countries, and put our preferred government in charge, they've turned out to be these really brutal dictators. Panama.
You mean like the Shah of Iran that we put in? Yeah.
And it never works out. Now we're going to do this again.
Well, you mentioned Cuba.
I think if there was any place you could have a democratic election and put in a republic, it would be Cuba, and they probably would want it. But go ahead.
Well, when you mentioned Kennedy, his first failure was Bay of Pigs, and what happened if you read, and there's a lot of written about the Bay of Pigs because it happened early in his administration, and he was embarrassed by it. He never again trusted the chiefs of staff, the military,
CIA.
well, the CIA either. But the generals. He gave up all trust in any of them. But I think because of that, he understood that the situation in Cuba could go a different way. It doesn't have to be this let's take it over. And then he stood strong on the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was probably one of his higher moments in 3.5 years in office. But yes, it doesn't make any sense why over the years there hasn't been a much more capitalistic, and we as Democrats, we're allowed to use the word capitalistic. We believe in capitalism. We're not socialist as claimed. And it's a shame, and it's a tragedy that it could not have been done. I think primarily because, Castro, he was powerful. He did have the support of Russia behind him for all those years, and the Soviet Union.
Yes. And, there were as many advisors that told him not to do it as there were trying to push him into it. So he had to make the call, and he admitted it. He mucked it up. He came out and sat in front of the American people and said, this was a bad call on my part, and it was not a well-organized effort to do this. He took responsibility, something that the current president would never do. Will never. And even the people who are trying to satisfy him, who are testifying, will never admit a mistake. Mark Wayne Mueller did that yesterday when asked if he would apologize to the families of the people that were murdered by ICE. He knew not to say, yeah, I think I should apologize for calling their children domestic terrorists. He blew it off by saying, well, we need to complete the investigation. I don't need an investigation. I can look at what happened and realize this guy was killed in cold blood because they were screw-ups, the guys that shot him.
Well, all you need to know in terms of that is, I mean, in the latest example, Trump has failed to acknowledge that we were responsible for all the schoolgirls being killed in the country.
Yeah.
There, it's a fact. And you ask these Trump people, they still, because it's a cult. These people can't think their own thoughts. They can't. Particularly when you hear them saying things like saying things like Gabbard did yesterday, which are completely 180, as you mentioned, Gary, to what they've said over the years. But we know, as a matter of fact, we were responsible for what happened there with all those schoolgirls being killed, innocent schoolgirls. And yet none of those cult members, Republicans, can acknowledge it. And Trump won't. And it's a fact. We know that we were the cause of those deaths. And they say, well, it's still under investigation. No, it's not. They're not even able to tell the truth. How can you even live with yourself when you can't say what you really think? Is it worth it that much to have power when you have to lie and just get up there and smile? I just don't get it.
Have you seen that Trump bought all of the men that are in his cabinet matching floor shine shoes? They're all black shoes, and he guessed at what their size is, and they all wear them. There was a close-up of Rubio's feet.
Yes.
And his shoes are about 3 inches too
He's
big.
running around in clown shoes.
He's walking around in clown shoes. That's how
Bozo the Clown.
bad it is that they bend the knee to this guy, that they won't even go out and buy their own shoes, and stand up and grow a spine, for God's sake. It's really pathetic.
Well, that's the word I love to use, and I'm glad to hear it. It is nothing but pathetic.
Mark Wayne Mueller has no experience in law enforcement, no experience in military, no experience in running.
He talks about the smell of war and all that. And yesterday he was asked by one of the senators, "Hey, where did you smell war? Because you were never in it."
But he knows how to run a plumbing company, so he's eminently qualified.
Didn't he say
maybe he can be a Watergate burglar?
What was a discussion about dueling on the Senate floor or something? That we can still have duels on the Senate floor?
Yeah. Two consenting adults and Rand Paul, who I rarely agree with anything that Rand Paul said, but the description that he gave of the injuries that he had when he was attacked by his neighbor, and broke 6 ribs and had 2 bouts of pneumonia and had to tie a rope to the end of the bed to be able to pull himself up, and it felt like he was being stabbed. And he asked Mark Wayne Mullen, you said that I should, you agree that my neighbor should have done that to me,
right?
Why would you say that? He didn't have a good answer for it.
Well, there's some comical relief every now and then.
But, this is a guy that's going to be in charge of ICE.
Well, another hour of the Voice of Reason's coming up, following a short break now for national and international news from CBS here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. I'm Ed Golly, along with Kevin Carey and Gary Gibbons, inviting you to stay with us here on the Voice of Reason. And when we return, we're going to examine some of the astonishing legislation passed by the Florida legislature in the session that just ended last week in Tallahassee, along with more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by JTV.com.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. Stock markets falling sharply around the world. The Dow down 239 to a fresh low in early trading after escalations in the war send oil and gas prices soaring. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told Fox Business last hour Washington might unsanction Iranian oil that's already been shipped.
In essence, we will be using the Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep the price down for the next 10 or 14 days as we continue this campaign.
Brent crude briefly climbed above $119 a barrel today. Gas prices here in the U.S. up to an average of $3.88 a gallon, and they're destined to go higher. CBS's Charlie Daggett from Tel Aviv.
The world's largest liquid gas plant, Ras Laffan in Qatar, in flames after Iranian strikes on the facility. The world's largest gas field, South Pars in Iran, among multiple sites attacked by Israel. President Trump angrily berating both sides on social media.
Defense Secretary Hegseth says there is no time frame for ending the war. The UN chief telling the U.S. and Israel it is, quote, high time to wind things down now. We're just in. President Trump's pick for Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin has gotten the thumbs up in committee. The vote 8-7 with Democrat John Fetterman voting in favor. His nomination, Mullins, now heads to the full Senate. Spanish newspapers are reporting the wallet of a missing University of Alabama student has been found in the sea. He was last seen outside a nightclub in Barcelona. His aunt is urging anyone who knows anything about James Paul Gracie to come forward.
We really just need everybody's help to please look through your phone if you were there that night. Look for pictures. Please reach out to the authorities there.
A heat wave in the western U.S. is shattering temperature records. It hit 108 in Palm Springs, California yesterday. In Phoenix, it was up to 97. Correspondent Chris Van Cleve.
Fire crews have been busy, already rescuing multiple overheated hikers since Monday. Fire Captain Adam Skyver expects the week to only get busier.
Everybody makes jokes like it's a dry heat, but it's just a different type of heat, and it affects people differently. And if you don't know that, it can put you in a bad spot.
New survey finds a third of us don't know when or if we can retire. Here's Michael Wallace.
They told Fidelity Investments they fear they won't be able to afford to stop working. 2/3 of Gen Xers are concerned their retirement savings won't last long enough. They are the first generation that will have to fully fund their retirement from their own savings.
This is CBS News.
Looking for spring jewelry looks? Find them at Jewelry Television. New customers get $20 off purchases of $99 or more at jtv.com.
Sun and Fun is celebrating the red, white, and blue at 52. Join us this April 14th through the 19th as we celebrate America's 250th birthday and 52 years of epic events at Sun and Fun. With the iconic U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds taking over the skies, live country music by Cooper Allen and Thomas Mack.
This ain't her first rodeo.
Day and night air shows, cutting-edge aviation technology, and thousands of aircraft on display. Feel the freedom with the whole family. Tickets are free for kids 12 and under, and they'll get inspired by hands-on STEM and aviation activity just for kids. Celebrate America this April in Lakeland, Florida. Get your tickets now at flysnf.org. That's flysnf.org.
Step into the story at the Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Discover all new experiences for the whole family. Set sail for adventure at Buccaneer Bay. Master stealth and speed at the Knights Ninja Challenge. And create enchantment at the Wicked Wand Workshop. Cheer for thundering jousts. Explore shops and games. And bite into the legendary turkey legs. Save on tickets at participating Circle K stores. Or visit BayAreaRenFest.com. The Bay Area Renaissance Festival. Weekends February 14th through March 29th. Huzzah!
Do you have questions after being injured in a car accident or injured because of someone's negligence? Do you feel overwhelmed or uncertain about the next steps after being injured in a crash? The personal injury attorneys at Perronick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes have been helping their injured clients since 1955 and are now on this radio station to provide guidance to you. Listen to FLA Law each Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. Let their decades of experience help you and your family. Offices in Clearwater, non-attorney spokesman.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show. Most powerful names in entertainment every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel to local business, promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the Tan Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Now, the voice of reason continues here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Here again is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Along with Gary Gibbons and Kevin Carey, we're off to Tallahassee to see what got accomplished. But of course, the two things that they are supposed to accomplish in the legislative session and didn't.
The Florida Constitution says they have a duty to fully fund education. We're 50th in the country in that, so they always fail on that every year. But the second and most important is that they have to pass a balanced budget. And they haven't done that last year or this year either. So, here we go with another expensive special session. And but they've already done a lot of bad things.
Well, I mean, we'll jump into those, but you're right. It's pretty, again, pathetic and sad when they haven't done the two things that they're mandated by the Constitution to do. And they just assume, well, we'll come back, and because DeSantis is dictating there'll be a special session on this redistricting based upon this Trump, voter. Let's cheat the election and get more Republicans in there. And by the way, just quickly on that, but there are 41% of this state is Republican, yet they have 20 of 28 U.S. House seats, which is 71%. If they follow through with what DeSantis wants, they would have 89% of the 28 House seats. How is that fair in terms of that party is 41% of the voting population?
Yeah.
Especially when the citizens of the state of Florida voted for a constitutional amendment for fair districts, which it makes it illegal to create districts based solely on political.
Well, and that's the problem he's got much more than in Texas, is that we do have, as you mentioned, have the constitutional amendment that was passed. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere than straight to the courts.
Doesn't mean they won't try to do it.
No question they will.
That's what they always do.
That's
unconstitutional things and say, okay, now you go unwind it in court, and it'll take you several years to do that.
Well, DeSantis, what he does, if you help him cheat, he puts you on the bench, which is what he did with Hope Florida. Two of the lawyers who helped him cheat, one is now in the Court of Appeals and one is now a circuit judge in Tallahassee. So crime does pay if you work for DeSantis.
Yeah. Now, point of order here. All of these bills we're going to talk about have been passed by both chambers of the legislature and sit on the governor's desk for signature. Isn't that right?
Right.
And he has a fixed amount of time to either sign it into law, veto it, and if he does nothing, then
it
what?
becomes law without
by
his
rote.
signature. Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start out and see what the heck he's doing here. One of the first ones I wanted to bring up is a House bill that renames a road in Miami after Charlie Kirk and a road in Fort Lauderdale after Crooked Donald. Another one renames the 124-mile-long State Road 80 from Palm Beach on the Atlantic coast to Fort Myers on the Gulf Coast. The President Donald J. Trump Highway. This did not pass unanimously. And finally, the third one renames Palm Beach International Airport as President Donald J. Trump International Airport, requiring the Palm Beach County government to enter into a licensing agreement with one of Trump's businesses, which has trademarked the airport name. So he's shaken down the county. You probably need to pay him like $5 million to use the name that'll be mandated by the legislature here in the free state of Florida. What a waste of money. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's unprecedented too. I mean, at least I guess they're creative. They're not solving any of our problems, but they're finding new ways to make Trump money.
Yeah, and just to show how focused on freedom DeSantis is, the bill strips the cities and counties that own Florida's major airports the ability to choose the name of the facility. This is why he's got to put those signs on the interstate. Welcome to the free state of Florida, because it's becoming more oppressive with every legislative session and everything this damn governor does.
Well, I've just said before, when we retake power, and we will at some point, I don't think these Republicans understand that we win and lose. I don't want them whining one iota at us about us being too overly aggressive or not following the law. They have no standing to make any complaint about this.
Yeah.
But they will.
Well, they can, but my point is what's happening with, for example, with NATO and what's going to happen. I think what's happening with Democrats, we laugh at them. They can say what they want. They've lost the ability to in any way bully us. We're so tired of it. And you're seeing that more and more in the House, and you can see it more and more when these elections take place in November.
Well, we've made it easier for Mosaic not to get sued. They're the largest fertilizer company in the world, and they create essentially cancer-causing byproducts from their mining activities. And so the legislature has made it more difficult to sue them over claims related to radiation exposure on former phosphate mines have been redeveloped for housing. Our other favorite, we shouldn't have a state bird. We should just have a house as our.
You're such a pessimist. I mean, think about it. It's given us a mountain range in Tampa Bay. Now, what would that property sell for? You got to put a nice McMansion up there overlooking the whole bay. Think
sad
ahead,
part
Gary.
is
There's
that
money to be made out of this.
It shows you how invasive that Mosaic's influence is on the legislature, because only 4 of the negative votes in the Senate. At last check, we had, I think, 11 Democrats. So there were 7 Democrats that must be getting money from Mosaic too, that decided that this was a good idea. It's just so sad.
It's remarkable how many of those gypsum stacks are in the central part of the state, around Polk County. I used to be able to see them from under the wing of a private plane that you wouldn't see driving around on the roads in this state. You just don't know they're all there, but it is incredible.
Yeah.
Some of them obviously were finished 40, 50 years ago. And it's just useless land. I keep thinking we should put solar collectors up there, but then the power companies, the oil companies get mad, not the power company.
If you're teaching civics, to the extent they still teach civics in school, and you try to make the point as a teacher that these legislators do what they think is best for the public, you'd be hard meant to do that and not just laugh. Toward what you're saying, this has been a big problem too. Limiting the discretion of local governments. House Bill 399 limits the discretion of local governments to deny developmental application on the basis of incompatibility with surrounding residential areas. Authorized manufactured homes anywhere. Again and again, if you look at this is taking away the authority of the local entities to regulate development, which is contrary to the Constitution. By the way, there are county commissions, city councils that have the authority to regulate things like billboards and construction. So I don't know where they think this can just all go away.
And then Senate Bill 290, Gary, the one that
it enables the state to sell public conservation lands, which we need those for water recharge and recreation and wildlife corridors. All of those things that we're gobbling up to build urban sprawl, which we're going to run out of water before we run out of land. That they enabled the state to sell it off to agricultural companies.
Yeah. And
now, how long do they have to operate a farm on it before they can turn around and sell it to a developer? Because that's what's happened to all the orange groves. And
the worst part is once it's gone, it takes a couple of centuries to naturally come back to what it was.
Yeah.
And think about without a state income tax, we're very much subject to tourism based upon this state and people coming here to for the various types of natural resources we have. So it's very short-sighted to just give that away, because we're very vulnerable to the resources being minimized and no no state income tax to back it up. So there's a theme here. At some point, does somebody push back and say we need to protect these resources?
Well, there was one bright spot. There's an issue that's local here, Terracea Aquatic Preserve that they were talking about. It's down just the south end of the Skyway Bridge on the Gulf side. There's a series of islands in the Terracea area, the Rattlesnake Key and others that are the average depth of the water there is 2 to 3 feet. They were talking about putting a major cruise ship port in there and have to dredge it to 50 feet in order to be able to put these large cruise ships, ones that are the newest and greatest cruise ships that are too tall to fit into the 150-foot span of the Skyway, a 15-story building. And so they passed the Senate Bill 302, which imposes regulatory barriers to creating that cruise port. And there's a senator down in Bradenton, Jim Boyd, who pushed that through. And we rarely say good things about Tallahassee. This was a good thing. Now we'll see if it holds, and we'll see if they are able to, prevent this horrible project from happening. But I know the landowner is now going to have their hand out saying, well, this law is essentially taken away our ability to use the property for our intended purposes. Well, so it's an eminent domain, an adverse taking of our land, and we should be compensated.
Because we know the governor plays into the hands of the cruise ship companies because of what happened in Key West when they wanted to limit the number of tourists that would invade that tiny little island every day, and they voted down there to limit it, and the governor overrode it and said, no, the cruise ships are paying me money, and so I don't give a damn about your quality of life. If they want to go there, they're going there. So isn't it probable that he will veto this bill so that the cruise ship companies can get in there with their dredging equipment? They don't give a damn about the environment or the damage they do to the landscape. They just want to get those ships in there because that makes them money.
Well, it passed the House by 109-0, and it passed the Senate 38-0. So
can you say override?
So they can override, and I think they will in this one because they've seen the way this governor. And there's another provision in this bill that makes it a requirement that the trustees of the Internal Improvement Fund, which is the governor and cabinet, get to vote on giving away state lands. And they have to give public notice of when they're trying to do anything that would affect this preserve. So they've gone out of their way to try to fix the problem like they had to do it with the state parks, because the governor was trying to develop those without any notice to the public. Yep. He was going to do it in a week's notice.
Yeah.
And thanks to a whistleblower, we found out that, about it and stopped it. And the legislature had to go in and stop him from doing that.
And I think it's important on another front, in the voting front, we focused on there's been a lot of publicity in the federal level. The House has passed this SAVE Act, which is completely anti-democratic, and I think it's going to get balled up in the Senate. But I'm not sure people understand that at the state level, there's a problem there, which is not benefiting from there being any type of problem. The Senate, the U.S. Senate, or filibustering being an issue. House Bill 991 requires Floridians who are registering to vote for the first time, updating an existing registration, who get flagged by state officials in Tallahassee to prove their citizenship. Providing copies of documents such as passports or birth certificates. The bill also stops university students from using their student IDs as identification when they vote. So right now, I voted yesterday. I just had to show my driver's license, and it was no big deal. But I don't know. I was born in Tokyo, Japan. I don't even know where my
birth certificate
is, or I've got a dated passport. I don't have a current passport, but. So my point is, it's still a very serious problem at the state level, even if, as I think it will not pass in Congress. Now, is there some ability to then come in and litigate that? One positive of the negative is it would not take effect until January 1, so it would not affect the upcoming elections in November. But it's a problem.
Yeah, but there's a city of Tampa election next spring that a lot of people may show up to the polls and realize that they have been unregistered to vote, because if you're a woman that changed her name when she got married and you didn't go through a formal change of name ceremony through a judge and get a judgment changing your name, and you have other hoops to jump through to prove that the name on your driver's license matches what's on your birth certificate, and they don't. So, and all of these things cost money. All of them are really a poll tax that has been outlawed in this country for
25th
years.
Amendment.
But but it doesn't stop them from doing it. And this has nothing to do with voter identity, and we already have laws that make you show ID to prove who you are. Okay, this is just a way to try to disenfranchise people and not allow them to vote, and that's un-American.
And it hits at two levels. It hits at the level of if you actually go to the poll and you can't vote, but probably to a greater extent, people just don't go. They read this, they go, I don't have it, and so they don't vote. They don't vote. Mm-hmm. So they never even have to address the issue at the poll, and they know that these people aren't stupid. They're frankly, to me, unpatriotic, which is kind of ironic. They think they're the patriots, but they just they dissuade people from being involved. And why women aren't offended by this, I have no idea why not. I mean, you're exactly right. It's a serious issue when you've got your name changed. And I can tell you, after 9/11, to go back and get a name change, if you haven't done it at some prior time, it's not easy to do. It takes time. You've got to go and show that it's not done to defraud creditors, et cetera. It's not just a rubber stamp thing.
And you have to pay a filing fee at the courthouse.
Absolutely. So, but I would hope that some groups, maybe the ACLU, somebody steps up now in anticipation of the problem. As you said, there are the mayor's race and city council races in March of next year in Tampa, and I'm sure there are other places around the state. But it needs to be addressed now legally. I don't think it's legal, but that's never stopped them before.
And just as a sidebar to this, at Mark Wayne Mullen's Senate confirmation hearing, when he was asked if ICE agents would be present at polling places, he refused to come out outright and say absolutely not. He was dodging that question because the answer is yes, we are going to implement every form of voter intimidation we can think of so that we can steal this election.
Yeah, and Trump is putting the pressure on them now to pass the Save America Act, which is really what they've done here in Florida. That's what this is. It's a blueprint.
So isn't it likely
legislation
that somebody's going to start a lawsuit right away, whether it's the ACLU or the Democratic Party?
Yeah,
whatever they're going to.
The problem with the federal legislation, though, is that it then allows the federal government to come in and seize all these state election records and allows Trump to put somebody like Mark Wayne Mullen in charge of elections, or somebody like Kristi Noem or RFK Jr. in charge of our elections, and we've always had states run elections, and that's the way it should be. And that's what this law is. It's one of the things that's in there that's so wrong.
Yeah.
Well, the Republicans have always had this playbook that we'll win if fewer people vote. It's not always the case, but they given the fact that the minority of voters are not Republican, they view that voter suppression is a part of their policy, their playbook.
And we know that there are a few judges on the Supreme Court of this country that would vote to allow these laws to stand.
Oh, yeah.
The question is, would there be as many as 5?
The Roberts Court will be known as the court that basically dismantled the Voting Rights Act. That's been his goal from the time he was appointed to the bench.
Yeah, you look at the thing about it too. And by the way, Chief Justice Roberts spoke at Rice University 2 days ago in Houston, Texas, and and he's in a very low key manner. You can, I'm sure, go Google it and hear it. But he talked about how he thought it was dangerous that either side was personally attacking judges, but I think that's more happening from the right. I mean, including our good buddy President Trump, who personally attacked his appointees.
Yeah.
But I would like to ask Alito and Thomas, is there anything this man would do that you would oppose? Anything. I am not kidding. I mean, there's some of these where Trump has lost, but it's a joke that it wasn't a 9-0. The tariff should have been a 9-0, for example.
Yeah.
But
Kavanaugh's leaning that way too. He's gone to the dark side badly. How about the DeSantis administration trying to cut AIDS and HIV medication for people throughout the state? Finally, the legislature, in a rebuke to him, it was unanimous vote again in the House, 108-0 and 38-0 in the Senate, to say no, you can't cut people off of their AIDS medication; they're going to die.
Well, all right. So it wasn't all bad news. There were a few good bills that actually gave some local government some authority. The Senate Bill 302 imposes new regulatory barriers to a proposed cruise terminal. You talked about that one. Another one here, House bill requires state officials to provide more public notice and detailed justification for proposing sale of swamp or state conservation land. And another bill strengthens the authority of local governments to control land use decisions on proposed data centers and establishes new regulations around electricity usage and water consumption. Of course, it's just that particular issue. If somebody wants to if a developer wants to cut trees down, the local authorities may not have any control over that. But I think that's probably because data centers have such an economic impact that can be detrimental when they suck up all the power and the water in order to operate. And the state seems to be recognizing that and saying, yeah, we're not going to just let them come in and do that anywhere they want, because they might do it in my district.
I'm not holding my breath that they're going to hold them accountable. Look at what we've done with Nestle and some of these other companies, giving them all the access to the water in our springs for decades that they now sell all over the world.
Yeah. And then when it comes to oil, the House bill extends a ban on drilling for oil and gas around the Apalachicola River up in the Panhandle. I wonder if Trump can override that veto, because he wants drilling everywhere, doesn't he?
No,
except in front of Mar-a-Lago, of course.
There's the bill that allows them to declare these groups to be terrorist groups. They've got this, this fixation now, and all these domestic terrorists. That's one of the comments that Barbie Nome lost her job talking about. But that's now this big thing. We can now declare you to be a terrorist group for whatever reason you might designate.
Yeah, that's that House Bill 1471. It gives the governor and the cabinet the power to designate advocacy groups as domestic terrorist organizations.
But think about before this session started, none of those issues were the ones we were talking about. We talked about affordability. We talked about the issue with homeowners insurance. There was some discussion about property taxes and whether that was good or not. But none of these issues are ones that really affect the average person. We talked about utility rates going down. So just like at the national level, Gary and Ed, none of these are really helping the average person. In fact, they're doing just the opposite.
Yeah, and the assault on unions continues under Senate Bill 1296. It poses new collective bargaining and labor organizing restrictions on, you guessed it, teachers, bus drivers, utility workers. When in doubt, pick on the teachers, right? Because God knows we don't need them. Utility workers and most other public sector employees, but not the police and not the fire. Those unions are always sacrosanct. But this law blocks new unions and decertifies existing ones unless at least half of all the employees in the workplace participate in a certification or recertification. And there's pressure from. I remember my wife worked as a nurse in the hospitals, and she said, that she knew nurses that she had friends that had moved to California and were unionized. The nurses were unionized there, and their benefits were so much better. Their pay was so much better. And she said whenever a union rep would come around and try to organize at St. Joseph's Hospital, the administration would put out all this information about, how bad it would be. And they really put pressure on them to the point where she said, I feel like my job would be, in danger if I went to an organizing meeting. Well, that's just not right.
Well, these are horrible laws based upon this gerrymandering that created this super majority of Republicans where the Democrats might as well not even show up. There's no debate on these issues. These are all just ramrodded through. And the issue is how extreme they are, where the right within themselves are debating about how extreme it is. There's no balancing on the other side.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to the Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're going to pause for a quick time out for some important messages. When we come back, we're going to talk about the case against Jerome Powell having been tossed by Judge Boasberg, and Trump selling classified information through the National Security Briefing memberships for donors. Wow, what could go wrong with that? And of course, a federal judge ruled against RFK Jr.'s proposed vaccine changes. That and more of the issues that the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Caregivers find the support they need on Connecting Caregivers Radio with Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregiver. Heard every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m., Linda and her caring and knowledgeable guests will bring you education, information, and resources, as well as a shoulder for caregivers. That's Connecting Caregivers Radio with Linda Burhans, the gal who cares for the caregiver, where you can find help and hope every Friday from 1 to 2 p.m. right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Ain't it good? You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
The following is a customer review of Dimmitt Chevrolet Clearwater.
Dimmitt Chevrolet Clearwater has been in business for over 100 years. That means they've had over a century to refine the art of scamming their customers. And boy, have they mastered the craft. When I went to Dimmitt to buy a used EV, the first con they ran on me was to tell me I had 3 days to back out of any deal I made. Turned out to be a total lie. Second con was to push me into financing the car when I wanted to pay cash. That way they could sell the loan and make more money on me. Because they didn't see me as a customer to whom they would sell a car at a fair price and treat honestly, they saw me as a mark they could grift to the fullest. They even stole my $4,000 federal tax rebate. It's amazing they didn't find a way to steal the car back from me after they sold it to me. Dimmitt screwed me every way, including up and down, because I had mistakenly assumed Dimmitt Chevrolet Clearwater was a reputable business. So remember, if you shop Dimmitt, you'll say, damn it.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Well, it's time for Poll Watch here on the Voice of Reason. This week, it's really more of a statistic watch. The wholesale prices rose sharply in February, providing another sign that inflation continues to percolate, even aside from rising energy costs. The Producer Price Index, which is a measure of pipeline costs that producers receive for their products, increased a seasonally adjusted 0.7% in just 1 month. Excluding volatile food and energy costs, the so-called core PPI increased 0.5%. Economists surveyed by Dow Jones have been looking for increases of only 0.3% for both measures. And for the all items index, prices rose faster than a 0.5% pace in January, but the core increase was less than 0.8% for the prior month. So what all this boils down to is on a 12-month basis, headline PPI inflation was at 3.4%, which is the most since February of 2025, while core was at 3.9%. The Federal Reserve targets inflation at 2%. So you can see why Trump is so livid to get the interest rates down to try to spike the economy, because he'll just tell us we don't have inflation, even though we see it creeping up. And we're going to get to how he's trying to deal with Jerome Powell, who heads the Federal Reserve, in just a moment. But right now it's time for a pop quiz. catch you guys. All right. And Big Ed, you're in on this. Now, earlier this week,
Nobody said there'd be a test.
Yeah, no, that's why it's a pop quiz. You heard Trump say it costs between $1 and $2 billion to build a super tanker, right? And I thought, gee, that sounds a little high just to weld a few steel plates together. Well, it turns out that building a super tanker, which is typically called a very large crude carrier or an ultra large cruise carrier with a capacity of over 200,000 deadweight tons, costs between $90 million and $150 million these days, depending on the size, the yard that you get it built in, and the technical specs that you want on that ship. So for $2 billion, you could buy about 15 of these ships, not just one. But he usually doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, as of early 2026, global proven oil reserves for the previous year are estimated at approximately 1.5 trillion barrels to 1.77 trillion barrels. OPEC members control about 79% of the total. Venezuela leads with 303 billion barrels, followed by Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other countries before we even get into the picture. I mean, we're producing more, but we don't have the reserves that these other countries have. Now, global daily oil consumption this year is forecast to reach approximately 105 to 106.5 million barrels a day. That's why you see so many tankers sitting out there in the strait. So here's the question. And I will tell you what I would have guessed is 125, okay? Because I don't know. I had to look it up. At current consumption rates, roughly how many years of production of these oil reserves is remaining? How long will the oil that we know is in the ground will last us? How many years? Now, coal is at about 300 years, but it's kind of hard to drive your car on coal or even run ships on them. And
I need my slide rule to answer this question. Sorry.
Gary, you want to make a guess?
75.
Big Ed's busy. He's not going to weigh in. And it turns out the supply will roughly provide us with 47 years of production remaining, which is why, of course, we're getting rid of the electric recharging grids and lowering the mileage standards on cars because we want to get it down to about 45. That means your grandchildren will live, if they live their anticipated lifespan, to see the world literally run out of oil. And what's going to happen? I mean, certain vehicles can be converted to electric. Even these big diesel 18-wheelers could be electrified and run on electric engines that could they can mount a battery underneath the trailer, right, and draw their power from that, recharge it while they're offloading and reloading the trailer. Okay, that can all work. Cars certainly, but not airplanes. Batteries are just too heavy. And maybe ships could run on small nuclear power plants. But this means that by the time this century's three quarters of the way through, all this oil is going to be gone. And what do the conservatives say? Drill more, burn it faster, go through it faster. It just makes no sense.
And it's like, you see the down the track, the train coming at you, and it's getting closer and closer and closer. And yet, and you're at some point, like you said, you're talking about real time. I have a grandson born 2 weeks ago. I mean, he'll be alive for the next century, but you're not even talking 100 years. You're talking, within 47. Hopefully, though, Ed, there'll be within this new administration at some point, the reality of what needs to be done is toward what you're saying, other alternative of uses of energy.
And what's her name? That was Tulsi Gabbard was questioned about the prospect of how many people in the world are going to need to relocate as we get just to the middle of this century from excess heating around the equator that will make the land where they live virtually unlivable. And I think the senator questioning her said, we're looking at anywhere from, was it 200 million to 1 billion people that may need to just relocate because they can't live where they are. Geez, what's going to happen even in Florida? Last year we had the hottest year on record. We probably will again this year. And we act like we can just resolve this problem by proclamation. Declare it a hoax, you don't have to worry about it. But we do.
Well, we never had such a short-sighted politics. No one's looking toward the future in terms of right now in power. And you're right. We're in a state, Florida, which is going to be very much impacted. On top of the fact that we'll be losing land, on top of the temperature, parts of Miami Beach are going to be gone.
I know it. Key West. Well, how long would you give Key West? It won't be long before they schedule their work day around the tides charts instead of the clock. Right? When the tide's out, they can get to work.
Right.
And then later on in the day, the streets are all flooded, and eventually they just need to abandon the place. They can't build a great big giant wall around Key West. It wouldn't be Key West if they did it.
Did you ever see the movie Planet of the Apes?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember how it ends in Charlton Heston? There on the beach is the
Yeah.
Statue of Liberty just torn over, the entire civilization of that time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's total disregard for those future generations, Ed.
Well, Crooked Donald is livid over the ruling last Friday by widely respected United States District Judge James Boasberg, a top federal judge in Washington, that blocked the Justice Department from subpoenaing the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors after determining the government produced essentially zero evidence to support a criminal investigation of Powell, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Now, here's what the president said in a post, quote, "How is this absolutely terrible Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Too Late Powell, not even allowed to be investigated for the horrible job he does," unquote. You know, I've been thinking the same thing about somebody else lately.
I mean, Judge James Boasberg, he's been a whipping boy of Trump for a long, long time. It's been the most recent one, but Boasberg was the one that was questioning, ordered these planes to come back that were unlawfully with these migrants headed to Venezuelans headed to El Salvador, and there's still contempt proceedings with that. And you mentioned the throwing out indictment. There also he's the most recent thing which has Trump bothered is he's a chief judge of the the D.C. district, and he's, as mentioned, a frequent thorn in Trump's side. He's now ordered that when a grand jury refuses to approve an indictment, at least temporarily, there be a rule entered. And let me say the one thing Trump has done. You want to know the one thing he's done? He has made a lie of the comment that a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. He has taught us that is not true, because you actually see grand juries who, again, there are no defense counsel, no judges, start refusing to indict, including the one he entered the rule on, which was the 6 military legislators who he was trying to have indicted, including Mark Kelly, astronaut, officer. And
former FBI Director James Comey and Letitia James, they all fell apart.
Oh, it's embarrassing.
Because there was no evidence against him. He's simply weaponizing the Justice Department.
So let me just quickly read you what the court said. This court has reviewed current practices relating to the return of indictments and notification of instances in which a grand jury has not indicted. And from there has now required notification to the court when a grand jury does not indict, which would happen, like a Haley's Comet. And they're seeing that as an highlighting the embarrassment, which it is. But you get what you pay for here. You have these issues we've talked about with these U.S. attorneys being thrown out of courtrooms in other states. It's a joke, and to have grand juries not indict is an embarrassment. So Boasberg's doing his job, and because he's doing his job, he's trying to be intimidated. He's not going to be intimidated. I mean, there's talk about impeaching Boasberg. It's just laughable. I don't know, Gary, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, the Trump, from day one, he knew there was no evidence of wrongdoing by Jerome Powell. This was strictly a power play to try to get him to lower interest rates so that he could have some growth in the economy that was not happening otherwise. And, his comment that not even allowing him to be investigated was, what rubbed Trump the wrong way, because it's always about, I'm going to make them spend money. I'm going to make them lawyer up, and then I'm going to make them, embarrassed by all of this stuff. And instead, the judges, thankfully, has said, there's no there. We still have, courts here that require proof of facts and proof of, a crime before we're going to drag people through this process.
Well, he said here too, when a grand jury fails to concur in an indictment in a GGO, a grand jury original investigation, the foreperson shall promptly and in writing report the lack of concurrence in the duly magistrate judge under seal. So making a big deal of the fact, and it's highlighting on the billboard that they effed up, is what's happening there.
Well, Trump's objective was to get Powell to resign or capitulate and lower the interest rates. And this nerdy little dweeb actually stood up to him up to this what I call dictator wannabe. Let's hear from former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice, Liz Oyer, weigh in on this issue.
This ruling is extraordinary because judges almost never quash grand jury subpoenas. But here, Judge Boasberg found that the government did not satisfy even the very low bar that the law requires. This is Jeanine Pirro's third straight loss in her efforts to carry out Trump's revenge agenda. In February, a grand jury refused her attempt to indict 6 members of Congress who Trump accused of treason. And then her criminal investigation of Joe Biden's use of the auto pen was reportedly shut down because she could not find any evidence to support the charges. This is also at least the 6th time that Trump's DOJ has failed to make a case against one of the president's sworn enemies. Other cases that have fallen apart include James Comey, Letitia James, and Adam Schiff. There are a couple important takeaways here. One is that courts have lost trust in the Justice Department. Their motives are so transparently political that courts are seeing right through them, and judges are not tolerating the shenanigans. 2 is that these political prosecutions are failing before they even get off the ground. Not a single one of these cases has gotten anywhere close to a jury, which is proof that they are completely and totally frivolous. And 3 is that Trump's efforts to bend the justice system to his will have been an utter failure. It's over a year into his presidency, and he still has not been able to make a case against a single one of his enemies, and not for lack of trying. Trump is humiliated and frustrated. He lashed out against Judge Boasberg on Truth Social, calling him wacky, nasty, and crooked. I'd consider that proof he's doing his job. We're certainly not out of the woods yet, but we do have a lot of evidence now that our justice system is still working. I hope you find that at least a little bit reassuring. I do.
As weeks come again, we keep seeing losses. One of the latest losses was a federal judge Monday night ruled against Trump on these wacky RFK provisions about vaccines, et cetera. We've talked about RFK Jr. has not only does he have no medical background, he's kind of crazy talking about worms in his brain, and he's completely incompetent. But as she just mentioned, Ms. Orr just mentioned, the courts, and we've talked about this, Gary, they push back and they push back. And this was the latest example is where the court invalidated these RFK vaccine provisions.
And the judge in that case went further than just saying that the vaccine rules were invalid. He said all of these people that he had replaced and appointed his crony friends, his fringe tinfoil hat people that, like to see polio and measles come back. He said they're not qualified to be on this panel. They're gone. So they were scheduled to have a meeting this week, which had to be scrapped because they're no longer in power. So thank goodness for the judges who are standing up for for sanity in this country.
But some legitimate issues that should be brought before the court include Kristi Noem committing perjury. Some congressional Democrats asked the Department of Justice to investigate that. It's indisputable. We know how she lied and why and what she said under oath. And the Department of Justice won't do it any more than they'll investigate Tom Homan, even though we have video evidence and audio evidence of him accepting that $50,000 bribe. This is a case of the dictator wannabe protecting all of his allies, no matter what crimes they commit, because he's committing crime every day himself.
Well, the letter from the Congress to the Department of Justice trying to make that referral, saying, investigate Kristi Noem, reminded the people at Pam Bondi and her crew at the DOJ that there's a 5-year statute of limitations for prosecutions. So if you don't do it, somebody else will.
Well, what's ironic about that too is that's the charge they brought against James Comey, the former FBI director, which again was thrown out as it was a complete joke. But that was the charge. What can we use against Comey? We want to get him. We want to penalize him for pushing back. Well, let's throw in this perjury before Congress charge as a felony, and yet they're ignoring that exact issue. And not just, there are many of these cabinet members, I think, as you mentioned, the 5-year statute, who are looking at that federal charge.
And now the Attorney General is going to be in the hot seat soon. Isn't that right? She's going to be called before, is it a Senate?
Yeah, she tried to pull a stunt yesterday. Did you see that? Where she and Todd Blanche showed up basically unannounced and wanting to have a hearing, a closed door hearing. Of course, always closed door, the most transparent administration in history always has to do stuff behind closed doors. And I think what Pam was trying to do is to say, well, I don't need to sit down for a deposition and have, and testify under oath, because I already told you everything at this, shadow show cause hearing, this hearing that was really nothing. And they gave him no warning. Basically the day before said, oh, by the way, she's coming tomorrow and would like to have an audience before the committee. And they didn't have time to prepare or anything because they're getting ready for the deposition in 2 weeks. And they said, it didn't matter what you would tell us at that closed door hearing, we still want to put you under oath. And they asked her if she would comply with the subpoena, and she refused. She refused to answer that question. So here we have the number one supposedly law enforcement officer in the country refusing to honor a subpoena. Pam's gonna be in real trouble.
Yeah, let me talk about just for 2 seconds about Pam Bondi. She's got a real problem. She's got, and you can see that as plain as day. This Congress, they're getting emboldened, these Democrats, because they see which way the wind is going. You see, they're getting much more aggressive at these hearings, and you're seeing less and less pushback from the Republicans. These are themes, if you're noticing, are taking place. On top of that, you don't have Trump supporting her. She's not on Trump's good list as much as Tulsi Gabbard and Pam Bondi keep kissing his ass. They're not. They're listed on the list of who's next to go out of the cabinet. So she's looking at a buzzsaw. And I don't know if she sees it or not, but she's made her deal with the devil.
You could see the look on her face yesterday when she was answering questions. She didn't want to answer many questions from the press about why they had shown up for this meeting. But I think it was just to give them a talking point, to argue about why she shouldn't have to comply with the subpoena. I don't think she's going to show up for the deposition, and then we're going to see where we are.
But the politics are not in her favor. Beyond saying I can do whatever the hell I want to do because I'm in Trump's administration, the politics do not favor that position. Representative Liu has already told her to her face at that last hearing before the state, the House Oversight Committee, you just committed a felony by committing perjury. To her face, he said that.
Yeah. Well, the Republican chair of the committee, Comer, he set the bar by saying, with the Clintons, when they refused to show up, he immediately filed for criminal contempt against them. So he's already set the precedent for when Pam refuses, he's going to have to invoke criminal contempt. So,
but my question then to each of you is, supposing the Democrats do take over the House and possibly even the Senate, then how's that going to change the whole landscape of this deal? I mean, they have the ability to impeach and remove her, don't they?
Yeah,
that's correct. They also have the ability to refer criminal indictments to the Department of Justice, who is certainly just a lackey for Trump. But they can make life a whole lot more difficult for this administration, including bar issues, criminal issues. it's not a good thing for them. I mean, there is some level with Trump and the courts. You wonder how far they can go. But if you're Pam Bondi now, or you're Tulsi Gabbard, any of these cabinet members, I would be very concerned. Kash Patel, I'd be very concerned about where this is going.
So what they're hoping for is that no matter how things turn out with respect to Trump being in power, or if he leaves power early, Vance coming in, that they're going to get pardons before the Republican administration leaves, right? So that all these crimes they're committing, they're going to be able to walk away from any possibility of prosecution for it.
Yeah, let me mention too with Pam Bondi, there's already been a bar complaint filed in Florida, a strong bar complaint filed, including former state Supreme Court justice on that complaint. Here's what they said. They didn't dismiss it. What they said was, we're not going to consider these allegations until she's no longer in office. So she leaves office. Those alligators have not gone away.
They're still sitting on the bank.
They're waiting there with a few more crocodiles.
Yeah. And the District of Columbia Bar Association has filed an ethics complaint against the guy who took Liz Oyer's place, the new pardon attorney. Martin, I think is his
Our good
name.
man. Yeah, we talked about him last week. He's now the who couldn't even get appointed U.S. Attorney General because of his poor record. And we mentioned last week how they had the gall, this administration, to think we want to take over and supersede all state bar investigations. Just incredible.
I wonder if Pam Bondi will appoint a special prosecutor to investigate her. Because usually the attorney general, as the chief law enforcement officer of the country, is the one that says, okay, we need to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate something because there's some connection with, like all the stuff that they were looking at for Trump. That was too hot of a potato for Merrick Garland to handle. So he appointed Jack Smith to do that. And now Pam, she doesn't, because she's lost so much credibility in her role, she can't even, with a straight face, appoint a special prosecutor to look at anything.
But wouldn't Trump see that no matter how much he wants to weaponize the Justice Department, without evidence of crimes, he just can't get these people indicted? And if sooner or later, wouldn't he then decide, well, why am I wasting my time with this? Even if I replace her, nobody else is going to be able to do this.
No, he still has enemies. The two things he promised was retribution and lowering prices, and the only one he can follow through on is retribution.
And now his leadership pack claimed in a new email blast that the president will offer donors access to private government information if they pay to become a, quote, national security briefing member.
Again, what's he raising money for? He can't run again. That's the stuff that people who are going to run for office again do. But it's become a giant slush fund.
The thing says that members will receive my private national security briefings, which include unfiltered updates on the threats facing America. This goes back to leaving top secret documents in the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago. He has no respect for the security of this nation's top secrets, and he's willing to sell them. Anybody from China can give him enough money and get those briefings and pass them back to Xi and the mob, or Russia or Korea, whatever.
And that's
right?
the solicitation where he included the picture of one of the flag draped coffins of one of the dead troops was a part of that solicitation.
Well, he's selling his caps, which violates the emoluments clause, right? He's pitching. I'm surprised he wasn't wearing his gold tennis shoes. Oh, come on, people. We got a certain number of laws we're supposed to follow in this country, aren't we? Well, maybe that's what a dictatorship's all about. We live and learn. It's time for our quote of the day. I've had enough of this. It was from Phyllis Diller. Here's what she said, Gary. Quote, I want my children to have all the things I couldn't afford. Then I want to move in with them. Okay. Now stay with WTAN for national and international news with CBS. We're going to be back again next Thursday at 9 a.m. for another edition of The Voice of Reason. I'm Ed Golly. Thank you to my co-host Gary Gibbons, Kevin Carey. And remember, Statement seems a little too implausible to be true. Don't you believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
Cammie McCormick, a plea from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
To the United States and to Israel. It's high time to end this war that is risking to get completely out of control.
Iran has intensified its attacks on Gulf oil and gas infrastructure in retaliation for Israel hitting a key Iranian gas field. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane this morning said the U.S. is working with Gulf allies on their defenses.
We're flying further to the east now and penetrating deeper into Iranian airspace to hunt and kill one-way attack garrisons, destroying Iran's ability to project power outside of its borders.
On Capitol Hill, Congressman Joaquin Castro questioned administration officials about the Israeli strike.
Do you know why Israel decided to strike that infrastructure despite the fact that the president said it should be off limits?
I wouldn't speak for Israel.
What do you guys know? We're at war. What do you guys know?
We'll have to take that for the record.
Yes, let's take it for the record.
The Pentagon is seeking $200 billion in additional funds for the war. CBS's Olivia Rinaldi has that.
In comparison, the U.S. has given about $170 billion to Ukraine, but that's been over 5 years. We are 20 days into this conflict, and now the Pentagon is going back to Congress and saying they need